and this is the last video of the Reconstruction by Thomas Kole, on which we relate to confirm and debunk historical aspects that took place in Tenochtitlan. Where did Cortes cry? Who hasn't heard to the well-known account of the Noche Triste, or the victory that occurred on June 30, 1520? In this event, the Spanish and their Tlaxcaltec and Cepalteca allies managed to escape from Tenochtitlan through this causeway at night. As you can see, it wasn't very wide, but it stretched for several kilometers. According to the narratives, those who managed to escape reached solid ground, and there Cortes was said to have cried beneath an ahuehuete tree, a scene that has been represented over the centuries. But was this real? No historical source mentions Cortes crying under an ahuehuete. Cortes himself described it as. And upon arriving in the said city of Tacuba, I found all the people gathered in a square, not knowing where to go. 150 Spaniards died, as did 45 mares and horses, and more than 2,000 Indians who served the Spaniards. Bernal Diaz del Castillo and others who would have escaped that night mentioned Cortes and other Spaniards. Tears welled upon in their eyes when they returned from Tacuba to search for survivors, and after a short distance, perhaps in Popotla, they found Alvarado, 4 soldiers, and 8 Tlaxcaltecas seriously injured, learning that no one else was coming behind them. There are other versions that speak of Cortes' tears, but not the 3. It is unlikely that the myth and representation of that event are true. Viewing the 3D recreation, this is one of the 3 main causeways that led out to Tenochtitlan, and specifically, it is now known as the Mexico-Tacuba Causeway, which led to the city allied with the Mexicas, called Tlacopan, not Tacuba, as the Spaniards called it. And back then, the tree would be located more or less around here in this wooded area created by the Creator. Based on this probable location of the tree, in addition to the fact that there is no reference to the crying beneath an ahuehuete, it is not very credible that the Spanish would have stopped in that area. Remember, they were in the midst of a battle, where those who escaped were at risk of the Mexicas arriving by the causeway or by the water at any moment. There was also the issue that the allied city of the Mexicas, Tlacopan, lay in front of them. Additionally, there was the risk of being trapped on 2 fronts, by the lake and by the Tlacopan warriors, so it would not have been advisable to stay in a vulnerable position. Especially, it would seek to locate the possible position of the famous ahuehuete. If we refer to a recreation of the current layout of the city, the Line 2 subway was built on top of it. Here we see the Popotla area, much like it was 500 years ago. As you can see, this area is next to the water. In fact, the Popotla station would be next to the old lake, confirming that the tree was near the water and the main causeway. Therefore, when we consider the existing evidence, which includes accounts and reconstructions on maps, there is no evidence that Cortes cried next to an ahuehuete, and the geographical position of that tree would have been highly compromised for the safety of those who escaped from Tenochtitlan. Nowadays, there are several new interpretations that suggest it's more likely that the Spanish finally stopped towards what is now the Remedios in Naucalpan, and not so close to the Tenochca capital and Tlacopan. the imposed Guadalupan myth. In Mexico, we are famous for celebrating the Virgin of Guadalupe every December 12th, where millions go to the Tepeyac temple to venerate the Virgin, and crowds of people walk along what is now called the Calzada de Guadalupe. But none of this is new. In fact, the Spanish merely reposed what was already in place for the conversion of the indigenous people, just as it happened with the causeway we mentioned earlier. In this image we see the city of Tlatelolco and its famous market. Near it is the causeway, which is now the famous Calzada de Guadalupe. Back then, besides behind an exit connecting the islet to the north, it also led to the temple of Tonantzin, the Mother Earth. That's why the crowds of people we see today adoring the Virgin did the same 500 years ago. But back then, they revered Tonantzin at her Tepeyac temple. Obviously, after the fall of Tenochtitlan, it was invented that the Virgin appeared where the temple of Tonantzin stood, and she wanted a temple precisely there. Well, somewhere around here there are likely traces of that temple. And of course, according to the myth, if Juan Diego did exist, he could have supposedly looked from Cuautitlan towards the shores of Tlatelolco. Did good mean he used that causeway to connect Tepeyac with the islet, demonstrating that the places and urban lead of Tenochtitlan were reposed, transformed, and gave rise to new things, called myths and stories. Finally, astronomical alignments. They are often called savage or ignorant, among other things, but contrary to those ideas, we see that many things were not done randomly but were planned with purposes. This is evident in the city's lead, which slightly began as humble islet but expanded to its zenith in 1519. We can see good urban planning, the division of the city into 4 sectors representing the cardinal points, and 50 zones composed of Tlatelolco or Xaltelolco. Urban planning respect that we don't even have today. Nowadays we tend to build haphazardly without much regard for urban planning. However, this order in ancient city of Tenochtitlan was a reflection of their worldview, which encompassed various aspects, including architectural, engineering, astronomical, ritualistic, and more. While they might have borrowed the spatial style from Teotihuacan, they adapted their city with residential areas and the surrounding environment. The most clear proof of this adaptation can be seen in this reconstruction image. For many, it's not just an image of the Templo Mayor, where the sun rises behind the horizon illuminating the city and the lake. I hope the creator did this intentionally and it wasn't just a coincidence, because this play of light and shadow did in fact occur. One of the functions of the Templo Mayor was to serve as a timekeeping device during the year. On the days of what we now call the spring and autumn equinoxes, which can fall between March 19-21 for the spring equinoxes and September 21-22 for the autumn equinox, the sun would indeed rise between the two shins of Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli as depicted in the reconstruction. This marked the moment when day and night were of equal length. This phenomenon still happens today on equinoxes when the sun passes between the remains of the small temple, although on a smaller scale than the reconstruction. Unfortunately, the final phase of the temple no longer exists, but it is theorized that the corners of the base were also used to mark the summer and winter solstices, signifying when the sun rose farthest to the north in the summer and to the south in the winter in the east. And of this demonstrates not only the mastery of construction techniques to create bases like this, but also astronomical knowledge that harmonize with the place where the sun rose, the mountains they face, and many other aspects. In addition to this, there's another image by Kole. Obviously, the remains of the two temples majors no longer exist, and modern buildings cover the horizon. However, and perhaps intentionally, the creator showed us alignments of both the structures. The Tenochtitlan temple aligns with Popocatépetl, while the Tlatelolco temple aligns with one of the peaks of Ixtaccíhuatl, creating a duality. Surely, not just the two grand temples but many other constructions harmonize with the entire lake, the stars, and beyond of the horizon. These recreated images span our perspective of this city that would obviously never return. Still, they encourage us to continue researching and seeking more precise information about these groups. The case of Thomas Kole's recreation allows us to compare old and new data, which can lead to discovering new things and formulating new theories about Mexico Tenochtitlan.